And my laptop just turned out. Okay. So, yeah, green energy, really nice idea. Would make the world a lot better in several ways that I'm going to talk about, and many others that I won't have time to. Why aren't we green yet? Well, so first let's talk about what energy is to us. So you go out for a drive, you go to the restaurant, that's travel using energy, gasoline, light in the restaurant, probably after dark, refrigeration to give you the food, industry to make the pots and pans and plates, and finally the computers to ring up your bill. Great stuff. Now, costs of energy, given the amount we use and the way we use it, climate change, which causes wildfires, as we have seen, tragically, war, even more tragic, and of course the cost, the dollar cost. So, a scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, etc. A good energy source is cheap, storable, efficient, sustainable, scalable, ready to deploy, and politically feasible. This is not true of any green energy source yet. Now, cheap. Solar cells, the sun is very powerful but very diffuse. It takes a lot of solar cells. They cost money. Dams cost money. Everything costs money. Storability is also really important. If you generate electricity and you don't use it, it gets wasted, or worse, it heats up the generator. And storage is a major problem for green energy, as we will see. And another problem with storing energy is every time you convert energy, you lose some. Now, fossil fuels are also really inefficient, but we don't notice because we've been using them that way a long time. You get maybe 30, maybe 50% of the energy out of fossil fuels. Sustainable, fossil fuels are not. We will eventually run out. We will eventually do too much environmental damage. Some other things are not very sustainable either. Like building dams fills up valleys. We only have so many valleys. Energy is at a mind-bogglingly large scale. This is a section of coal, a coal pile, you know, as large as some cities. So anything that gets rolled out has to be on that scale. This is a mad scientist. A lot of great ideas are not ready to deploy yet, including fusion, and even some kinds of fission energy that would really be good. Speaking of fission, there is a political problem with some kinds of energy, even including wind farms. And so energy has to, any source of energy has to overcome all of these hurdles in order to replace the infrastructure that we have today. Now, electricity is in some ways a huge pain because you can't store it. You have to generate it and use it. And you have to generate it from some other source of energy. But it's so darn convenient, you flip the switch, the light comes on, that's great. For fixed things, use electricity. For transport, use oil, gasoline. There's not much more convenient than a gasoline engine for a car. Batteries are changing that a little, I'll talk about that later. Wind might be storable with modern technology. Even 10 years ago it wasn't. It's not very reliable. There are political problems. Oh, they'll kill birds, they'll ruin my sightline. Solar cells, again, only somewhat storable, and that's recent. They are expensive. They only work when the sun is shining, and they don't work in places like Germany where the climate is just wrong, despite attempts. Hydro is great if you don't mind flooding valleys and if you have enough valleys to flood. Not always the case. We've built out a lot of hydro, and we've built out probably about as much as we can, except for maybe run of the river, but that's small scale. Batteries, until recently, were just not good enough for grid scale storage. Now Elon Musk has shown that they are actually cheap enough and can be deployed. Imagine these boxes full of those little things. That's what he did. The other picture was the EV1, which was the first electric car, which I wasn't impressed by. Ask me about in QA. Nuclear, obviously not very politically feasible, and the best designs, such as thorium reactors, the tech is not fully developed yet. Biomass doesn't scale, expensive, and usually not sustainable. It's not as green as it sounds. Palm oil plantations, corn, ethanol, just sucks. Okay, so I'm sure I've said some controversial things here. now that I've got you all, so to speak, fired up, it's Q&A time.
Slam dunk. Michael Jordan.
So which sources would you say look the most promising to you?
One, I would have to say fission. Now that other countries are developing fission technologies of their own and starting to look at the modern things like liquid salt reactors, the old generation of fission reactors I won't try to defend, although they have some defenses possible, but liquid salt just looks so much better in so many ways. There's no pressurized steam to lose. If it overheats, the salt just runs downhill into catch basins, and that's the end of it, and it's air-cooled. Aside from that, solar and wind with battery backup might make sense. That's still being deployed. We'll have to see how they do without subsidies. The point of subsidies is to prime the pump. Subsidies are good, but they don't scale. You can't build a grid on subsidies. You can start the manufacturing chain on subsidies. And as far as I know, we haven't yet seen the economics of whether the pump is primed enough at the point the subsidies run out. Yes.
You didn't talk about tidal energy. Do you have any opinion on that?
Sorry, on what?
Yeah.
Tidal energy. It's a good question. It's somewhat a limited resource and somewhat environmentally problematic, and somewhat the technology isn't there yet. If people can build it out, also wave energy, if people can build it out and make it work, more power to them. What?
No pun intended.
Yeah. You're right, I did. Sorry. Yes.
That one was
Do you foresee a shift in the political landscape that will allow for green energies to really take off before we start feeling, a fossil fuel crunch that's going to force it? Or do you think we're going to have to wait until the hand is forced?
Okay, I'm going to have to put on my cynical hat to answer that. So we are already feeling and ignoring several crunches from fossil fuels. How much we can continue to ignore is how much can you boil the frog. We've got wars in the Middle East going back decades. We've got climate change that anyone who is not either Fox News or strongly incentivized to ignore it can see that it's a problem. Are we going to shift away? I'm not really optimistic unless we get a power source that's actually cheaper than coal. If, for example, Focus Fusion, which is one of those, today I'd have to call it a mad scientist thing, they're funded at a few $1 million a year, which is ridiculous. They have an idea that has a small chance of working. They should be funded at hundreds of millions a year, but we're not rational. Anyway, that's just one I happen to know about. If that works the way they claim it will, then it replaces coal and we're good.
Wow.
But the chance of it working is who knows. Yeah.
EV1 was the best electric vehicle of all time, changed my mind.
Okay, I'll tell a story. I test drove one. I went to the dealership and I got a test drive, and I stepped on the gas and it went, and I sat in it, and there was this giant, where are we? Sorry. No, not there. It was on batteries there. Okay, so this is what was like this wide, and it was this wide because it was chock full of lead acid batteries. You were actually sharing your passenger compartment with lead acid batteries because that's where the technology was back then. And finally, I got in the car and I started driving, and the salesperson let me get on the freeway, and I stepped on the gas to accelerate, and the charge needle went from one acceleration. Like I got back with a quarter of the tank gone after a test drive. So I wouldn't have bought one, no way.
Mind changed.
Yeah.
So I have a question about biomass. I work in recycling, and we have a big problem with biomass markets in California because all of the biomass plants are closing because of the AB 32 changes that are happening in subsidies for green energy.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Well, it's always a problem of, will the subsidies run out too soon, and would it ever have been sustainable? Biomass, when you have extra bio to burn, might work. Biomass, when you're growing the mass to burn, probably doesn't, because the conversion from chemical energy to electrical, you're going to lose at least half to 2/3 of your energy. The conversion from sunlight to plant matter, you're going to lose 95% of your energy on top of that, multiplied. And the conversion from, for example, corn to ethanol, you're going to lose another, 50%. Or palm oil, you're clearing rainforests to grow little teeny oil seeds. So if you have a source of biomass and you don't know what to do with it, by all means, burn it. But using biomass as a primary power source, I just don't see it.
Joel?
Are you familiar with perovskite crystal solar cells?
No.
Brand new research that surpasses the 20-ish% efficiency that solar cells have been able to reach with silicon. And silicon is probably not ever able to get past like 22%, whereas perovskite has already gotten up to 20% just in about 3 years of work. So it's kind of hopeful, but it's like a multifaceted crystal that has it's the equivalent of multiple solar cells on each side of the crystal. So they could layer it with silicon and get up to maybe 50% efficiency.
That's cool. Yeah, solar cell technology is in fact advancing. I just heard of another one where they actually have put little rectennas inside the solar cell to capture the photons directly and convert them to electricity. That also blows past the efficiency barrier of silicon. So yeah, solar cells are getting better, and if we can come up with a good storage technology, then solar cells look great in large areas, especially kind of near the equator.
Yes, you talked about batteries,
Yeah.
who has a lot of hype for the moment, and you talk about Tesla and Elon Musk, but we don't speak a lot about how to produce those batteries, and we have a comment on that, in the fact that batteries last for not so long, and I've got the impression that it takes a lot of energy to produce the battery.
Well, a lithium battery that has hundreds of charge cycles, you're definitely going to get many times more energy storage out of it than the embedded energy in its manufacture. The manufacturing cost, I mean, the energy is part of the manufacturing cost. So I guess I would say that to a first approximation, that just comes out in the economics. If the batteries are cheap enough, then they're worth using. If they're not cheap enough, you can't use them anyway.
I don't know if this is the same kind of question, but I always wonder if it's better to buy a used gas car. Like I thinking about, even if it's not a great, like let's say an SUV, or an energy efficient new car. Energy efficient meaning like hybrid or electric. Do you know?
I do not know. In general, I would say the cost of purchase is proportional to the cost of manufacture, is proportional to the embedded energy of manufacture. But since cars burn gasoline, which is inefficient and very cheap, the amount of carbon dioxide that you're putting in the air, there's a multiplier on it. I would guess that if you take your fuel cost difference, which may be surprisingly low, between 20 and 35 miles per gallon, take your fuel cost difference and double or triple it and see if it makes a difference. To estimate the amount of carbon in spending the money for a new one versus an old clunker.
But like the actual carbon footprint of both of those things.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is if you want to roughly guesstimate the carbon footprint, and I'm kind of making up these numbers, but the method is not too far wrong. Look at the price of the new car, subtract the price of the old car, figure out the difference in the amount of gasoline they'll use, and then triple that cost and add it to the price of the old car, and then see which one costs more.
Y'all get that?
Yeah.
Everybody write that? Everybody got notepads
Right
out?
up that for
Just
you.
watch the YouTube.
Yeah. We're recording.
Basically-
Good, no, good answer. Yeah.
Basically,
Yeah.
penalize the gasoline by a factor of 3.
Yeah.
And then you have
And-
factor in market
So-
price and.
There's no answer because he doesn't know what the costs are for both of the cars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Depends on how much you drive.
But I have a energy researcher friend who recently did buy an energy efficient, like a 35 miles per gallon non-hybrid, after making a calculation that it was
Huh.
as good as a hybrid.
Interesting.
And
Regular
it was
gas-
used.
gas
He bought
car.
it used.
Yeah.
Used gas car.
A used gas car,
Okay.
but it
Was
wasn't
not
an
a-
SUV, it was
Yeah.
a tiny
Yeah.
35 in the city, 45 on the open road.
That's really good.
Yeah. Wow.
All right, one last question, and then we gotta move on. Back there.
I was going to anyone else, but-
Yeah.
Oh,
That was you.
I know, I learned this in my organic chemistry class or something, and I think it's true, but you might know better than I do, that an average combustion engine is like 18% fuel efficient, and the human body is about 36 to 38% fuel efficient. Is that accurate?
Okay, so the average car engine is maybe 18, 20, 25 if you're lucky. The average modern power plant is closer to 40, 50, maybe 60 for a natural gas turbine. The human body, it depends on how you calculate the efficiency. If you're looking at the work we get out, it's only about 75 watts worth.